I never imagined that a quiet weekend at my friend Nancy's lake cabin in Michigan would be the moment everything in my life changed. But when I drove back to my house, the one I'd loved and cared for over 4 decades, my heart sank. The first thing I saw was the lawn. My rose bushes were flattened. The flower pots I'd tended since my husband passed, lilies, lavender, all of them, were shattered across the driveway. And right there in the middle of it all, a mound of my belongings. Clothes, photo albums, even my late husband's fishing rod, dumped like junk. I stepped out of the car, legs trembling so badly I had to grab the door for balance. At first I thought it was some kind of mistake. They couldn't have meant this. But then I saw it. A note slapped onto the front door like an insult. Read, "Sorry Mom. We need space for my wife's parents. There's no room for you anymore. Hope you understand." It was signed in my son Caleb's handwriting. Still neat and confident, just like when I used to stay up late proofreading his school essays. Across the street, the neighbors had frozen in place. Mrs. Hamilton clutched her garden gloves to her chest. The Taylor kids stared from their porch wide-eyed. I could feel the weight of their curiosity and pity pressing against me like heat. I knocked, soft at first, then harder, my heart pounding in my chest. The door cracked open. Caleb peeked out. His face looked stiff, uncomfortable. He couldn't meet my eyes. He shifted his weight like a teenager caught sneaking in late. "Mom, this is for the best," he mumbled. Behind him stood his wife, Megan, arms folded, eyes sharp. She sneered like I was a stray dog at the door. "You've had your time," she said flatly. "My parents deserve comfort in their old age." I opened my mouth but nothing came out. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd asked them for anything. I'd cooked for them, watched over Caleb when he was sick, gave up vacations to babysit my grandson. I did it all without ever being asked. And now all I got was a closed door. Literally. Caleb didn't reach out to comfort me, he just pushed the door shut. I heard the lock click. That sound echoed through my head like a final goodbye. I stood there in the sticky June heat, sweat trickling down my back, gripping that awful little note like it was the only thing keeping me standing. And suddenly it hit me, they'd loved the house more than they'd ever loved me. I wasn't heartbroken. I was finished. Not broken, not bitter, just done. I wiped my eyes, picked up the old suitcase they tossed outside and walked away. One bag was all I needed now. The whole neighborhood stared, but for once I didn't care. There was something calm growing inside me, cold and clear. I ended up sitting on a cracked green bench in Riverside Park, holding that bag like it was the only solid thing I had left. The sun hung low in the sky, birds chirped in the trees. Kids played nearby. A couple argued quietly. An old man fed pigeons. Life kept going like nothing had happened. I sat there invisible. My hands still shook, stained with dirt from my photo albums and the fishing rod. These were the same hands that planted every hydrangea in that garden, that kneaded Sunday morning bread so Caleb could wake to the smell of home. I thought of those quiet mornings, sipping tea on the porch, listening for my grandson's little voice asking, "Grandma, can I help water the roses today?" I gave everything I had to that family. I skipped getaways with friends because Megan needed time for herself. I canceled retirement trips when Caleb's business struggled. I missed birthdays and reunions to hold the household together. And today they wouldn't even answer the door. I pulled a tissue from my pocket, dabbing my forehead, pretending it was just sweat. A woman walked by, offered a quick, sympathetic glance, then kept going. I didn't blame her. Who wants to step into someone else's shame? I don't know how long I sat there after the sun dipped behind the trees. My mind felt like fog, thoughts bumping into each other. But something inside started to sharpen. I began replaying every moment with Megan. The fake sweetness when guests were around, the way she said, "Mom," just loud enough for others to hear. But behind closed doors it was always little digs. "He shouldn't eat so many sweets," or, "This decor is so outdated, we should modernize." Then came the hints. Comments about downsizing when Caleb lost a client. Jokes at dinner about how cozy it'd be if her parents ever moved in. I'll never forget the look in Megan's eyes the day she said, "Once this house is finally ours, we'll turn your garden shed into a guest spa." I laughed back then, forced, awkward, thinking she was just being her usual dramatic self. But sitting there now, that memory cut deep. It felt like she'd been telling me her plan all along. And Caleb, my son. The same boy who used to run to me with scraped knees, who'd fall asleep with his head in my lap, breathing softly against my neck. He'd been drifting for years, hadn't he? Ever since Megan came into the picture, he started coming to me less for comfort and more for money. His "thanks, Mom" became mechanical, like he was checking off a to-do list. I told myself I was helping, holding the family together. But the truth hit me hard on that park bench. They'd been slowly pushing me out, piece by piece. They didn't want me. They wanted the house. My house. The one where I slow danced with my husband on every anniversary by the back patio. Where my grandson wobbled through his first bike ride. Where I planted my first rose bush the year we moved in. My mouth curled into a bitter smile. How naive I'd been, thinking love and loyalty would protect me. That ache in my chest, it wasn't sadness anymore. It was resolve, sharp and unyielding. As the streetlight buzzed on nearby, its pale glow caught the lines on my hands. Every wrinkle, every scar, I'd earned them. I was the one who stayed. The one who showed up. The one who held that house together through every season, every sickness, every holiday meal. And this was the thank you I got. I folded the photo of my grandson and tucked it gently into my purse. No more pretending. No more excuses for them. I stood slow and stiff, knees creaking beneath me, but lighter than I'd felt in years. I didn't know what came next, but one thing was crystal clear. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd just disappear. But they had no idea I was only getting started. The next morning, I wandered into a little diner tucked behind Main Street. It smelled like scorched coffee and old booths, and that strange comfort only worn places can give. I slid into a corner booth, wrapped both hands around a chipped mug of tea and just stared out the window. People rushed past, carrying groceries, kids' phones, each one wrapped up in their own world, unaware of mine. Then I heard a voice I hadn't expected. "Martha." I turned slowly. It was Janet, an old friend from the neighborhood committee. She stood there holding a bag of cinnamon rolls, her face full of shock and pity. "Oh my God, are you okay?" she asked as she slid into the booth beside me without even waiting for an answer. My lips parted, but nothing came. She reached across the table and gave my hand a gentle squeeze. That one small gesture. It almost broke me. I felt the dam inside me strain, but I held it together. "They kicked you out, didn't they?" she whispered. I just stared. Janet leaned in even closer. Her voice dropped to a hush. I wasn't going to say anything, but a few weeks ago at the farmer's market I overheard Megan talking. She told someone they were planning to sell the house once you were gone. My breath caught. "I thought she was joking," Janet added quickly. "Who does that? Who talks about their mother-in-law like she's just in the way?" But the worst part wasn't what Megan said. It was how calm she sounded, like my future had already been decided. My stomach turned heavy and sour, like something rotten had settled in my chest. Janet just shook her head, sadness and fury all over her face. "She told someone they were going to use the money to pay off her parents' debts," she said, barely whispering. "Said they'd finally live easy. Bragged about how you trusted them too much." My grip tightened on the mug until my fingers ached. Janet gently squeezed my hand again. "I wanted to warn you sooner," she said, "but I didn't know how. I'm sorry." I let out a long breath, shaky and thin. The world felt off, like the floor had shifted beneath me. "They loved my money more than they ever loved me," I said quietly. The words stung coming out. For a moment I saw Caleb's little boy face. Those chubby cheeks, big eyes, the way he'd squeeze my hand when he was scared. I saw him at graduation hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. Where had that boy gone? I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to settle the storm that had taken root there. My whole life I believed that love meant giving up time, comfort, dreams, because that's what family did. I thought if I just gave enough, they'd see what I was worth. But now I saw the truth. Love without respect isn't love. It's just a transaction. Janet's eyes filled with tears. "So what now?" she asked. I lifted my chin slowly. My voice came out calm and sure, like it came from a place deep inside me I hadn't visited in years. "I'm going to take my life back," I said. I stood, brushed the wrinkles from my skirt and felt something I hadn't felt in ages. Strength, steady and rooted, blooming inside my chest. Janet gave me a slow nod, wiped her eyes and said, "Good. It's about time." I walked for blocks all the way downtown. The storefronts had gone dark. My feet throbbed, my shoulders burned from carrying that old suitcase, but every step felt deliberate. Like I was stepping closer to the woman I used to be. Eventually, I found myself in the arts district, standing outside a familiar red brick building wedged between a flower shop and an art gallery. The faded sign above the door read, Studio 7. Years ago, before I gave everything up, I worked part-time at a community art center. The director had liked my dedication so much she helped me qualify for a small studio apartment through a staff housing program. I kept it all those years, barely used it, just paid the minimum rent. It had always been my secret place. A quiet backup plan I never thought I'd need. That night, digging through my purse, I found the keys at the very bottom. I let myself in. It smelled of old paint and pressed petals. The windows were dusty. The furniture was minimal, just a small bed, a kitchenette, one tired old chair. But to me it felt like shelter. I set my bag down and walked to the narrow window overlooking the alley below. And for the first time all day I let out a full breath. No tightness. No shards in my chest. I kicked off my shoes, stretched my sore feet on the cool floor. And in that dim, quiet room I started to imagine. No harsh voices. No tension. No tiptoeing around someone else's moods. I closed my eyes and heard my husband's voice in my memory. Quiet doesn't mean weak, Martha. Don't forget that. That's when the plan started forming. It wouldn't be some loud, dramatic scene. No screaming. No knocking on doors. I'd let them believe they'd won. Let them see me as beaten and small. Meanwhile, I'd be gathering everything. Tax documents, property deeds, our marriage certificate. Every bit of proof showing the house still legally belonged to me. I pulled out my phone and stared at a contact I hadn't touched in years. Richard, my late husband's best friend. He used to be a lawyer, now retired. My finger hovered over the call button, heart pounding. Then I pressed it. He picked up after the second ring. Martha? Is everything okay? For the first time that day I felt calm. Richard, I said, voice steady, I think I need your help. Can we meet tomorrow? He didn't ask why. Just said, of course. After I hung up, I stood slowly, joints creaking as I stretched. I walked over to the little kitchenette, filled the kettle and set it on the old stovetop. As it began to hiss, I rested my palms on the counter and stared at the chipped tiles. My husband's voice came back to me, soft and familiar, words he'd said more than once at our kitchen table. Don't sign away what's yours. Not even to family. Love without respect isn't love. I used to think he was just being cautious. I truly believed Caleb would never betray me. That family would always come before money. But now, I understood every word. I remembered the day we added Caleb's name to the deed, for tax reasons or so they said. I remembered the promises, the reassurance. At the time it felt harmless. Now those documents felt like traps, like paper chains tightening around my neck. I made my tea and sat down at the small table. Dug through a box and found an old spiral notebook. Edges curled, paper yellowed. Inside were notes in my husband's handwriting. Expenses, repairs, even names of his old legal contacts. I traced my fingers over the faded ink. Every word felt like a quiet reminder. You're not alone. You still have power. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. They thought I was too soft, too tired to fight. They didn't know how hard I worked to keep that house. The jobs I turned down. The friendships I let go. The nights I stayed up doing the math on bills when my husband got sick. That house was my life's work. I wasn't going to let them take it without a fight. By morning I felt clear-headed. Focused. I buttoned up my old brown coat, even though the air had already started to warm. I walked to a little cafe tucked behind an old bookstore downtown. Most folks wouldn't even notice it unless they'd been there before. The smell of coffee inside was rich and comforting, like an old memory. I chose a window seat and ordered a pot of jasmine tea. Outside, early risers passed by with leashed dogs and paper bags. And then Richard walked in holding a worn briefcase, his gray blazer a bit wrinkled but familiar. He looked older than I remembered, but his eyes, sharp as ever, caught mine instantly. Martha, he said warmly as he slid into the seat across from me. You look different. Stronger. I laughed under my breath. Maybe I am. We sat for a while in comfortable silence. When the waitress brought our drinks, I reached into my bag and placed the stack of documents between us. Then I told him everything. About the note on the door. The bags of my life tossed on the lawn. The voices that wouldn't even open the door. Richard's face changed. First surprise, then quiet anger. He tapped one of the property documents with his finger. They assumed you wouldn't fight, he said softly. But they were wrong. These are still in your name. The main title, "Without your signature they can't do a thing." A warmth flickered in my chest. Not quite relief, but the first real sense of control I'd felt in weeks. Richard leaned closer, his voice calm and firm. "First, we file an injunction. That'll block any attempts to sell or transfer the property. Then we'll clarify ownership, file the legal paperwork, and serve them notice. You'll have your rights back, Martha." I nodded, letting every word sink in. Then his eyes narrowed. "But you need to be ready. Once they realize you're not backing down, they're going to push harder." I swallowed. The weight of it settled in my gut, but it wasn't fear. It was resolve. "Hold steady. Let them try," I said. "They've already taken everything they could. There's nothing left for them to break." We went through the paperwork together, page by page. Richard jotted notes and flagged key sections. At one point I caught my reflection in the window. Older, grayer, worn, but something in my eyes looked different. Grounded. Unshakable. I thought of everything they tried to erase. The smell of fresh bread in the kitchen, laughter echoing through the hallways, roses blooming in the back garden. They didn't deserve that house, not after what they did. When we finished, Richard reached across and gave my hand a light pat. "You're doing the right thing," he said. "It's time they learn who you really are." I squeezed his hand and gave a small nod. For the first time in years I felt strong. Later that night, back in my tiny studio, I was sorting documents into neat piles when my phone buzzed. Caleb's name lit up the screen. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the answer button. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to let silence do the talking. But I picked up. "Mom." His voice was tight, almost forced, like he was trying to sound concerned. "We've been worried." Worried. The word nearly made me laugh. After tossing me onto the lawn like trash, now he was pretending to care? "I'm fine," I said flatly, offering him nothing. There was a pause. I imagined him pacing, running his hand through his hair, just like he used to when he was caught in a lie. "Listen," he finally said, "things got a little out of control. We didn't mean for it to go that far. Can we meet? Just talk?" I felt bitterness rise, but I agreed. I wanted to look him in the eye, see him realize what he'd truly lost. We chose a diner downtown. The same place where Janet had first told me the truth. I got there early and took a window booth. The server brought me tea and I watched the steam curl up like a slow breath. I thought of every meal I'd cooked for him, every night I held him when he was sick. When he walked in, he looked exhausted. Megan followed right behind him, stiff and alert. They slid into the booth like actors taking their marks. "Mom," Caleb said gently, reaching across the table for my hand. I pulled mine back and folded it neatly in my lap. His eyes flickered. "We just wanted to say we're sorry," he continued. "It was all a big misunderstanding. We just thought it would be easier." "Easier for who?" I interrupted, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut through Caleb's weak delivery. He looked down, swallowed hard, then glanced toward Megan. He jumped in right away. "We've just been under so much pressure," she said, her tone sweet but paper-thin. "My parents have nowhere to go. And, well, since you're so independent, we figured maybe you wouldn't mind staying somewhere else, for now." I watched her carefully, every word polished to sound innocent while dancing around the truth. Then she pulled a thick envelope from her bag and slid it across the table. "These are just the final transfer papers," she said smoothly. "We thought if you signed today we could all move forward. As a family." I stared at the envelope. For a moment my hand twitched. I wanted to rip it in half. Instead I gave a small, cool smile and pushed it back across the table. "I'll think about it," I said evenly. Megan forced a laugh, but her eyes narrowed. "Of course. We knew you'd be reasonable." That's when Caleb finally looked at me. Really looked. And just for a second I saw something flicker behind his tired eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe confusion, maybe just the realization that he didn't recognize the woman sitting in front of him anymore. I finished my tea slowly and stood up before either of them could speak again. As I walked out, I heard Megan hiss under her breath, "What did she mean, think about it? She's supposed to sign today." I pushed open the diner door and stepped out into the crisp evening air, and a quiet, powerful satisfaction filled my chest. Let them scramble. Let them worry. They thought one envelope could buy my silence. But I wasn't theirs to manage anymore. Back at my studio that night, I dropped the documents onto the table like garbage. I stared at them for a long time. The clean fonts. The legal language. the cold betrayals tucked into neat little paragraphs. And suddenly a strange peace washed over me, solid and grounding. It felt like I had stepped out of fog and into full clarity. I moved into the kitchen and put on the kettle. The whistle was sharp and shrill, but I took my time. Measured the tea leaves. Let the jasmines steep. Let the scent wrap around me like armor. While I waited, I opened an old photo album I had pulled from the lawn that day. My fingers turned each page gently. There was a picture of my husband standing in the backyard holding a basket of ripe tomatoes. Another of my grandson waving a sparkler under the stars, his face lit with joy. I rested my fingers on their faces. And for the first time in days there was no pain. Just clarity. I hadn't just lost a house. I'd lost the illusion of family. What they gave me wasn't love. It was control. Love without respect is nothing but a cage, and I was finally free of it. I took a long sip of tea, letting the warmth reach my chest, and picked up my phone. "Richard," I said, voice clear and steady. "Let's review those documents tomorrow. I'm ready to list the house. But it's going to be on my terms." There was a pause. Then he answered, his voice quiet, almost impressed. "You're sure?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I've spent my life fixing problems for people who never once thanked me. Not anymore. This is mine, and I'll decide how it ends." I ended the call gently and set the phone down with care. Then I walked back to the table, took a pair of scissors from the drawer, and began slicing through the unsigned transfer papers. Each cut felt like I was freeing myself, one tether at a time. When I was done cutting the documents, I swept the scraps into the trash, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and sat back down. I took another sip of tea, noticing the faint tremble of something new in my fingertips: excitement. That tiny kitchen with its chipped counters and dusty blinds felt more powerful than that whole polished house ever had. No hardwood floors, no fake smiles. Just me in my space, finally free. I glanced again at the photo of my grandson and traced the curve of his cheek. "They'll miss me," I whispered into the quiet. But only because I finally said no. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, letting the night sounds drift in: honking horns, distant music, the murmur of strangers living lives I no longer envied. For the first time in decades, I wasn't just someone's mother, wife, or caretaker. I was simply Martha. The next morning I woke up before dawn. I dressed, grabbed my purse and the worn manila folder with all the property records, and walked to Richard's office downtown. He met me at the door with a tired but kind smile and ushered me inside. The city was still quiet, barely stirring. We laid out the documents across his big oak desk. "We'll move quickly," he said, tapping the folder's edge. "I know a discreet realtor. She'll list it privately. They won't even know until it's done." I nodded, his words sinking deep into my bones. While Richard made the calls, I sat in the leather chair by the window and looked down at the busy morning unfolding. People bustled down the sidewalks, coffee in hand, bags slung over shoulders. I used to think I didn't belong in that rush. Too old. Too invisible. But not today. Today I felt more alive than all of them. When Richard hung up, he looked at me over his glasses. "It's done," he said softly. "The house is officially listed. It's private for now, so they won't be tipped off. But trust me, offers will come fast. That place has value. Real value. Not the kind they ever understood." I exhaled, a weight sliding off my shoulders. "Thank you," I murmured, voice hitching slightly. He shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. We're not finished. But Martha," he paused, his tone warm, "I'm proud of you." I pressed my lips together, fighting back the emotion warming my chest. After we sealed the final files, I wandered into a small fabric shop on my way back. I hadn't sewn in years, but something in me longed for the steady rhythm of it. Back at the studio, I dug out an old patchwork quilt I'd started decades ago. I spread it across the table, touched the faded patterns, and picked up my needle. Stitch by stitch, the quilt came back to life, each one quiet and firm like the decisions I was making now. By afternoon, the studio felt full again. Threads scattered across the surface, soft music playing from a dusty radio, and that warm jasmine scent still rising from my teacup. I knew it wouldn't be long before they found out. I knew they'd rage and panic. Let them. Inside that room, alone but steady, surrounded by fabric and light, I felt untouchable. Being alone, I realized, wasn't punishment. It was the gift they gave me when they showed me who they really were. I finished a square, held it up to the fading light and smiled, slow and real. The next week passed gently. For the first time in years, I wasn't scrambling to meet anyone's needs but my own. Each morning I rose before the sun, wrapped myself in my old robe and brewed a pot of tea just for me. I sat by the window with the quilt in my lap, the needle gliding in and out soft and steady. It felt like I wasn't just stitching fabric, I was stitching myself back together. A few days later I walked into Richard's office again. This time I stood taller, shoulders back, chin high. He rose when he saw me, pausing as if trying to recognize the woman in front of him. "Martha," he said, smiling in surprise. "You look lighter." I set my bag on the chair and smiled gently. "That's because I finally stopped carrying what wasn't mine." He nodded, motioning for me to sit. We laid out the final stack of documents across his desk. "These right here," he said, tapping the folder, "are the closing papers. Once you sign, the sale is final. The funds go straight to your account." I stared at the papers for a long moment. Images flickered behind my eyes. My grandson's tiny feet on the kitchen floor, my husband chopping vegetables and humming, Caleb laughing in the backyard with grass stains on his knees. But just as quickly, the memory of that cruel note taped to the front door came rushing in. "Don't make a scene." I took a breath, picked up the pen and signed. My hand didn't shake. The signature flowed smooth, sure. When I set the pen down, a quiet thrill moved through me, like I'd jumped off a ledge and discovered I could fly. Richard looked at me with something like admiration. "It's done," he said. "They have no legal claim. The house is yours, sold, clean, final." I nodded, a small smile pulling at the corner of my lips. "I didn't just do this for me," I said quietly. "I did it for every woman who's been told to stay small, to give everything, to vanish when she's no longer convenient." Richard's eyes softened. He reached over, placing his hand gently on mine. "You're free now," he said. Those words echoed in my head like church bells. 1 week later, the knock came at their door. It was raining, cold, relentless, the kind of rain that slips into your bones and makes even the boldest hurry home. But they had nowhere left to hide. A court bailiff stood on the porch, flanked by 2 officers. He held an official notice in his gloved hand. I watched from across the street, unseen under the cover of an umbrella. Caleb opened the door. His face turned ghostly white. His mouth moved, but no words came. Megan appeared behind him, eyes wide with confusion, mouth tight. "Mr. and Mrs. Dalton?" the bailiff asked, calm as ever, like confirming a reservation. They nodded numbly. He unfolded the paper. "This property has been sold. You have 30 days to vacate. Refusal will result in court-enforced removal." Megan let out a choked sound, part scream, part sob, and gripped the doorframe like it might keep her upright. Behind them I could see my old living room. The mantel where I once kept my husband's fishing hat. The fireplace where I taught my grandson to roast marshmallows. But I didn't feel sad. Just still. Certain. Neighbors gathered under umbrellas. Some whispered. Others filmed. I caught sight of Mrs. Hamilton across the street, her jaw slack, eyes wide as saucers. Finally, Caleb spoke. This has to be a mistake," he stammered, stepping forward. "My mother would never." The bailiff handed Caleb a thick envelope. "Inside," he said evenly, "you'll find all legal documentation, transfer of ownership, sale confirmation, and the eviction order. You may review it with your attorney if you wish." Caleb's hands shook so badly the envelope nearly dropped into a puddle. Across the street I stood quietly under my umbrella. Rain ran down my cheeks, mixing with a single tear I let fall. Not from sorrow, but release. Like the last drop washing away years of sacrifice that had become chains. Megan collapsed onto the porch, sobbing. Caleb stood beside her, speechless, gripping the papers like they could somehow reverse what was already done. The bailiff pinned the notice to the door, nodded to the officers and stepped back. They didn't need to say a word. I had already done what needed to be done. I took one more breath of the wet, heavy air and turned away, walking slowly but with a spine straighter than it had felt in years. They thought shame and guilt would bury me. But I hadn't been buried, I had been planted. And now I was finally blooming. The next day I asked them to meet me. Not just anywhere, but at the busiest cafe on Main Street. The kind of place where tech workers clicked away on laptops and retirees gossiped over bottomless cups of coffee. I arrived early, chose the table dead center where every person could see. I wore my best navy coat and the pearl brooch I hadn't touched since my husband's funeral. When they walked in, they looked hollow. Caleb's eyes darted around, panicked. Megan clutched her expensive purse like it might save her. I motioned to the seats across from me. They sat without a word. The hush in the cafe was thick. Even the barista froze mid-steam. I pulled a slim envelope from my bag and slid it across the table. "These are the final documents confirming the sale," I said clearly. "The house is no longer yours. You have no legal claim and no right to contest it." Caleb reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. Megan broke into tears, loud, unrestrained sobs that smeared her makeup and drew stares. I didn't flinch. I reached back into my purse and laid a small check on top of the papers. "This is a moving allowance," I said gently. "Enough for a motel and a few meals. It's symbolic but generous, all things considered." Megan buried her face in her hands. Caleb looked up at me, really looked. His eyes were red, frantic. "Mom, please," he choked out. "We didn't mean, we just thought." I raised my hand. "No. You made your choices," I said, voice calm but unshakable. "You loved the house more than you ever loved me. You thought I wouldn't fight back. You were wrong." The entire cafe had gone silent. A young woman nearby froze with her coffee halfway to her mouth. Caleb reached for my hand, but I calmly pulled it away. "You only miss me now because I finally said no." I held his gaze a moment longer, then picked up my tea and drank slowly, savoring every sip. Across from me they sat, broken and small, their world collapsing around them. When I stood, I placed a few dollars on the table to cover my tea, and walked out without looking back. Behind me, I heard Megan crying, Caleb murmuring something I didn't care to catch, and the quiet reactions of bystanders. But I never turned around. The city stretched out in front of me, open and endless. The air felt so clean it nearly stung my lungs. I had cut the final tie and I was free. I didn't head straight home. I wandered the city instead, letting the sunlight warm my face as I passed bookstores, corner flower stalls, busy intersections. My steps felt light, like I was floating just above the pavement. Eventually, I found myself at Richard's office. He looked up in surprise as I walked in. "Martha," he said, rising quickly, "is everything okay?" I nodded and shut the door behind me. "I want to make one more change," I said, sitting down and pulling out the folder that held my financial records. My voice was steady. There was something final in it. "I want to redirect the entire inheritance and the proceeds from the house. Set up a trust. Something that helps the people who actually need help. Elderly care. Women's shelters. Something real. No more handouts to those who treated me like a wallet." Richard stared at me for a long second. Then a slow, proud smile spread across his face. "You're sure?" I met his eyes. "They never loved me, only the money. Now they won't have either." He nodded and got to work immediately. For the next hour we combed through every detail. With each signature I felt another chain fall away. When I signed the last page, Richard let out a breath like he'd been holding it the whole time. "It's done," he said. "They'll be notified tonight." I stood, picked up my bag and felt lighter than I had in decades. "Thank you," I said, my voice catching just a little. Not from weakness but from release. He nodded, his eyes shining. "You did something extraordinary today, Martha." That night, as the sky turned gold, a courier arrived at their motel with the notice. Inside was a single letter stating plainly, the money was gone. Redirected. There would be no safety net. No inheritance. Just the echo of their own choices finally catching up. I imagined them tearing into the envelope, eyes wide, voices rising in disbelief. I could see Caleb throwing the letter across the room, Megan collapsing in tears on the floor. But I didn't smile. I didn't need to. I didn't feel anything at all. The phone started ringing that night. Message after message, Caleb's name flashing on my screen over and over. I didn't answer. The voicemails came next, pleading, panicked. "Mom, please. Don't do this. We're family. We made mistakes, but we can fix this." I set the phone down and kept folding the quilt I'd been working on, smoothing each corner carefully. By morning they were pounding on my door. I heard their voices through the thin studio walls. "Mom, please open up. We didn't mean for it to go this far." Their desperation wasn't about love. It was fear. Fear of discomfort. Fear of consequences. I stood in the kitchen, still and quiet. I didn't answer. I didn't move. Eventually the pounding faded to begging. Megan's voice cracked, thin and raw. Please, we'll do anything. Just think of your grandson. A bitter laugh almost slipped out, but I swallowed it. They only remembered me now that I'd said no. Their cries faded. I heard footsteps retreat down the hallway. I imagined them heading back to their motel, heads low, eyes avoiding every neighbor who had started to whisper. Word had spread fast after the eviction. Even Mrs. Hamilton at the corner store had something to say. After all she did for them, left her like trash and thought no one would notice. Another neighbor chimed in. That's what happens when you treat people like servants and expect no pushback. I used to shrink myself to keep peace, bend to avoid shame. But now, my silence was gone. And my story echoed down every street in that neighborhood. Later that day I blocked both of their numbers. I deleted every voicemail without listening. I closed every door they might try to reopen. I sat down with my tea and unfolded the quilt again, feeling the final piece fall into place. I didn't hate them. That would still mean they held space in me. No, I felt nothing. Just a calm, clean emptiness. A kind of peace I'd never found in all those family dinners or hollow holidays. Outside, the city carried on, fast, bright, and indifferent. And for the first time in my life, so did I. Over the next few weeks, I turned my tiny studio into something that finally felt like mine. One afternoon, while watering a pot of herbs by the window, I looked out at the glowing skyline. And I felt nothing for that big suburban house. Not grief. Not longing. Just freedom.